So what exactly happens when restraining orders get filed with malicious intent? Well, there's really only one outcome: law-abiding citizens losing their Second Amendment rights. We've got a perfect example for you today. We've got a plaintiff and an attorney in studio. This is Wallingford v. Nguyen. Let's talk about it. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel today. That is right, the topic, red flag laws, most specifically the lawsuit Wallingford v. Bonta is the topic today. And we're very fortunate because we are able to be joined by a couple of folks in studio today to walk us through it. That is the plaintiff of the lawsuit, Miranda Wallingford, and her attorney, Matt Cabero, who is a partner at Michelle and Associates. This is the guy who is writing the California gun laws books nowadays, so he's definitely got some knowledge and experience under him. But Miranda and Matt, thank you very much for joining me in studio today.
Nice to be here.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. And guys, before we get into this today, as always, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to these videos. That like button is really pushing the algorithm these days. We want to get this out to as many people as possible and educate them, especially as we go toward the ballot box and have the Second Amendment as a priority when we pull the lever this November. So I guess we can get right into this, guys. This is a wow. Reading this lawsuit, I couldn't help but feel that I was reading something out of a movie. This isn't something that you typically see happen, yet it's very real for you, Miranda. So could you please go ahead and just walk us through your lived experience leading up to this lawsuit?
Okay, it's quite long, about 11 years worth. I'm 80 years old. My husband's 81. We've lived in our house in Huntington Beach for 55 years. And we picked that location and have stayed there because it was a nice, friendly, safe cul-de-sac in a generally pleasant weather and otherwise area. And in 2013, a couple moved in to the house next door to us. They had a brand new baby, and they were very polite. The wife was a little restrained, but very nice people, it seemed. But right away, she began to say, wow, your head just kind of putting leaves over in my yard. Okay, we'll trim a little bit. And it went from that to, we have a big melaleuca tree, and that put leaves in her yard. And at some point, she said, I would like you to take your tree out. And I thought, well, I don't know why. You have 2-3 trees in your yard. Well, we're going to take them out, and then you take yours out. I believe to this day she believes that my husband agreed to that, which he did not. So they removed their trees, and then she began to really put the pressure on us about ours and filed actually a lawsuit, a civil suit, to ask the court to make us remove this tree. And on that same day, she filed a small claims for the damage that she thought we were doing to her property by having this tree. And it just went on.
Even before that, what did she do to your husband?
Well, no, this was right after that.
Okay.
So because we did not remove our tree and she did hers, and she did not win any of these cases, they were all dismissed without merit or whatever the term is. And so one day in June of 2018, my husband went to the front of their house to bring the trash cans in. And she came over and said to him, there's all those leaves on your yard. I threw them there, and I'm going to keep doing that till you take this tree out. And then she turned away from him and started screaming and fell on the sidewalk on her hands and knees, crawling away towards her house. And it wasn't 5 minutes, and there come the police. She claimed that my husband had assaulted her.
How old is your neighbor, just for context?
She said at that time right now she just turned 61. She was in 2018. She was in her 50s. She's extremely agile. She's a gym rat. She goes to the gym every day.
What about
my husband, by the same token, had surgery and can't raise his right arm, and he's right-handed, above, straight in front of him. There's no way he could have hit her. And I've always been a little perturbed that she showed the police the scabs on her hand where she fell down because he hit her. Well, you don't get scabs in 5 minutes. You're still bleeding or whatever. So anyway, they arrested my husband, and it took many, many months. It wasn't until 2019 that the city attorney for Huntington Beach sent my husband a letter saying that they were not going to prosecute him. It was a detention certificate.
They declined to prosecute because there wasn't sufficient evidence.
But all of that time, we were fearful that they were going to prosecute my husband for something he didn't do. That caused us to put a security camera on the front of our garage so we could see. If we had had that camera, this never would have come to anything, because you would have had evidence that he did not, in fact, assault her. And so she began to do damage and throw stuff on our property and put up these horrible cloth fence type things. And so we put a camera on the side of our house. And so she began to do damage towards the back. So we put a camera on the back of our house. At the present time, we have 7 cameras running 24 hours a day. And I pay extra because I need to see all the time, because she's never stops doing so. So she filed a request for a restraining order against my husband, and that was granted. And so we gave up our guns, and we're in fear of being prosecuted for this alleged event, as well as having a restraining order. It began the turmoil. But she continued to do things and began to have issues that we were watching her on our cameras. So she filed after the original restraining order, and we filed.
Well, why did you file a request for a restraining order?
Because she was nonstop in threatening and harassing and damaging.
What kind of threats was she making?
I'm going to kill you. I will. Bizarre things like I'll get the KKK and they'll come and cut your head off. During the little uproar with the BLM, Black Lives Matter, she would put a little sign whenever someone came to our house. She would run out and hang a BLM sign towards our house on the hedge. And as soon as the person would leave, she would take it down. I mean, what that had to do with her or us, I don't know. So her vulgarities, her harassing of everyone that came to our house, whether it was a relative, friend, or worker. And it just, and this was about mainly on her part of saying that we were invading her privacy and spying inside her house.
So it starts with a tree.
It
starts with a tree. You have a dispute there. You know what? I could kind of see that. I've dealt with my neighbors just as far as, hey, let's put up a new fence. Maybe we split it. Something. That sort of stuff can cause friction. So I wouldn't necessarily say that that's out of the ordinary. What's definitely out of the ordinary from reading this lawsuit and hearing this from you is the action that followed afterwards. If I remember correctly, I even remember reading in the lawsuit that at some point bleach was poured on the tree.
Yes.
Is that right? So you're getting death threats, you're getting damage to your property.
Yeah.
Your response then in turn is to say, hey, let's put some video cameras up to make sure that whatever is going through your mind, whether you want to make sure you're able to accuse the right person of doing damage to your property, some sense of security there, and you file for a restraining order. She then in turn files a restraining order against you for an invasion of privacy. And again, correct me if I'm wrong here, because this is what I remember from reading the lawsuit. It was her opinion that the cameras had a little bit of her backyard in the view of the camera, which was put up by a third party. It wasn't put up by you.
That's right.
It was put up by a contractor. It was immediately moved upon learning that. But that essentially is the tipping point when the judge grants a restraining order against you and your husband.
Right. I was just going to say, yes, that the judge did apply as a restraining order on both of us. However, in that, I believe it's called a minute order, the judge did agree that the alterations we had done to our camera to restrict the view was acceptable to the court and was not in fact infringing on my neighbor's privacy.
But the restraining order stayed.
That's right.
So obviously a huge issue there. And Matt, if you could jump in here really quick, hearing all of these things, reading the lawsuit, I'd be hard pressed to figure that the court of opinion wouldn't be in support of the Wallingfords here. As you know, as I've learned from doing these videos talking about courtrooms and courtrooms proceedings, it's not always the same in a courtroom. But bring us up to speed on the courtroom side of it here. What laws are we dealing with? What were the challenges in the lawsuit?
Yeah, so as Miranda mentioned, there's been a number of cases that her neighbor has filed. And to date, between Miranda and this neighbor, there have now been seven separate lawsuits, most of which involve what are called civil harassment restraining order petitions. And most of those were filed by her neighbor against the Wallingfords. Miranda and her husband have filed 2 restraining order petitions. The first one, I believe, was in 2019, after the cameras that were installed witnessed her neighbor making throat-slitting gestures, spraying, damaging the cameras, saying all sorts of vulgar and offensive things directed at her and her cameras. And naturally, within the meaning of California law, that falls under the definition of harassment, in which an individual can seek a civil harassment restraining order. In California, when it comes to these types of petitions, usually the way it works is the individual files a petition for a civil harassment restraining order, and the court will decide right then and there whether or not to grant what's called a temporary restraining order. And that temporary restraining order usually lasts until there can be a hearing in which the opposing party will have an opportunity to rebut the evidence that's been presented. And the problem is, at least in California, any type of restraining order, whether it be a civil harassment restraining order, domestic violence, elder abuse, there's a whole number of different types of restraining order petitions that all sort of follow the same sort of function and structure. Even a temporary restraining order, after no evidence has been heard by either side, it's just a straight up allegation. The granting of a temporary restraining order will result in someone's Second Amendment rights being taken away.
And that is typically what we advocate against, right, as a Second Amendment advocacy organization, is the fact that there is no due process in implementing these restraining orders. And then you have a case like this where literally the restraining order is put in place because for a short period of time, accidentally, a camera could see into somebody's backyard. There's no danger there.
It goes even, I think it's even worse than that, is that effectively what you have here is an individual that was taking steps to protect themselves. And what any step that you would imagine any reasonable person would have done in their situation, they put up security cameras because their neighbor was threatening to kill them. Right. And because of that, the court issued a restraining order.
So as far as the penal code is concerned, what's the law here and what's the challenges that you brought in the lawsuit?
So naturally, I mean, these types of restraining orders, as this case perfectly illustrates, judges have very broad discretion on whether or not to grant these things. Depending on the type of restraining order, the burden of proof is not that of like a typical criminal case where it's beyond a reasonable doubt. In these types of cases, in civil harassment restraining order, for way of example, it is a clear and convincing standard. So that's significantly less than beyond a reasonable doubt. And then even in cases like domestic violence restraining orders, it's even less than that. It's preponderance of the evidence. And so there's a much lower bar for a court to find sufficient evidence to actually grant these types of orders that take away people's civil rights, including the Wallingford's Second Amendment rights. And ironically, and this is something that we brought up in the lawsuit, shortly after the court issued a restraining order in this case against the Wallingfords, there was a court of appeal decision out of the California Court of Appeals that said simply installing security cameras that happen to capture neighbors' property as part of the cameras being focused to a point where their really purpose is to act as a security camera. If they happen to capture a portion of your neighbor's property that's in plain view, it's not a violation. And if you think about this from, we were considering asking the court to join companies like Amazon and Google that make these cameras. Because if they're the ones that are selling these cameras as, to the public as a means of security, well, then all of a sudden you've got courts that are issuing restraining orders for people putting these things up in the first place.
Wow, yeah.
It's like you think that they may have something to say about that. So it is eye-opening for sure, to say the least, how this happened.
And Miranda, I'm very curious. How did you learn that you had the restraining order placed against you, and what was the emotional process for yourself and for your husband, having gone through everything that you had gone through up until this point, and then even further, what was the emotional processing of realizing and understanding that you were being stripped of your Second Amendment rights?
Well, when the particular judge granted the restraining order against all three of us, my feeling was she was just tired of hearing all of this. It was just bizarre. And it's like, okay, go to your corners. Each one of you just go to your corners and just quit this. Well, we quit because we hadn't ever threatened her. We never damaged her property, and we gave up any ability that we had, not physical, but our firearms. Here's someone who's threatened to kill you, and you have nothing but your own physical being, and I don't know what, a kitchen knife is all that we had to protect ourselves. And it makes you even more fearful to think that I don't have anything at my disposal. I'm dealing with someone who appears to be becoming more unstable as the days go by, and is threatening me, and is a very agile, younger than me. The whole thing was just scary, just very scary, and very costly, because we had already had to give up and store our guns, which isn't easy anymore. As a matter of fact, the place that we've had them for the last 3 years, or had them, won't keep them. I wanted them to keep a couple of mine because I felt that they were maybe in better condition than what I would have to store my beautiful Satori shotgun. And they are not storing anymore. They're not providing that service. So it was costly, and thank goodness the place we had them were very nice people, but you feel restricted, and on the short side of your capabilities against someone who is very irrational and hasn't quit. With a restraining order, she still has not. She does something every single day.
How many times have you called the police?
Well, I have a stack of cards, and it was so often that I was gonna, invite them all for Thanksgiving. But I will say And if this, you can edit this out if you want. I have been highly disappointed in not one thing that I called the police about. They would come in, except for one officer. Would come in, look at my video, and even take a clip of that and download it or upload it to their link and leave.
And this is while you had a restraining order against her.
Absolutely.
Wow.
They did not, so it wasn't until this most recent threatened to kill me and my neighbor in an absolute uncontrolled rage in front of our house that was all captured. The police came, they came in, they took a clip of that, like 6 or 8 minutes long, and arrested her. That was the first time.
After
In
how many
all
years?
of this time.
How many years?
Well, she's been there 13 years. I'm sorry, she's been there 11 years. So she was arrested, home by midnight. That was that. The next day, she's out doing her dance. You know, like, you just can't stop me. So it is.
And these are the same restraining orders that you have the legislatures pushing as the solution to
the solution.
violence.
I was going to say, so I mean, you're talking about 3 years not having access to your firearms.
Right.
What a lot of people would consider is a primary tool of being able to defend yourself, especially when somebody is threatening to kill you.
To kill you.
So you're talking what, between 15 and 20% of the time that this has been happening, you have not had access to that tool in case it got to a point where it needed to be used. It seems like at the very least a stressful situation, but a very difficult one to be going through for such a long period of time. Matt, I'm sort of curious, like I said earlier, we get asked all the time, why do you oppose red flag laws? This certainly fits in that category. Where are we at as far as the case is concerned? And what is the answer here to ensure that something like this doesn't happen in our society?
Yeah, and that's a tough question, and I think the case kind of illustrates that it took some time, to get the case filed as a federal constitutional challenge to the Wallingford situation. And the problem is these restraining orders, typically, as was the case here, granted there's been more than one, but they can last anywhere up to 5 years. And in the Wallingford's case, because they put up the cameras, the court issued a 3-year restraining order. And so by the time we get the case filed and actually go through the process of having a court hearing, getting evidence in front of the judge, and then the judge making a decision, the issue here is that the restraining order expired by that point. And so at that point, the court basically dodged the issue. And so they said the case was moot. There's no more restriction anymore. And, if you want to talk about something that's capable of evading review, restraining orders are a perfect example of that. And so, it's this type of situation that makes it very difficult to challenge these things, unless you're somehow able to get a decision, during the pendency of the order. In this case, it was pretty clear, I think, that there was definitely some delaying going on here because, they knew that in this situation there was no way to justify someone losing their Second Amendment rights simply because they put up security cameras.
But you did get that decision, correct?
We did. Well, eventually after the restraining order expired. And
Right.
so the court said it was moot.
I see.
And so, for whatever reason, it took them however many months to finally issue the decision. And that's what happened in this case.
So, I mean, is the answer here kind of the answer as old as time? We constantly are basically saying we've got to get these elected officials that are currently in Sacramento out. We've got to make sure that they stop imposing these gun laws on us here in California. I know specifically to this, there's still a couple of bills that we're tracking and advocating against. We have already been able to kill several bills that were proposed this year. The most recent one I can think of, they were trying to create the option to extend restraining orders by, I think, double, like 5 years. So you could essentially have a restraining order on you for 10 years. if that's the case. But that's something that we are constantly pursuing. Is that the answer there, or is there another path? I mean, this seems to have taken a long time. I'm sure it wasn't a fun time, but is the legislative process the answer to fixing this?
I think it's a combination of many things, and the legislative process is definitely one thing. Obviously, that's a very tough battle in California with our current makeup of the legislature. But that being said, one thing that did happen, of course, after this case was the Bruin decision, and so we at least have some more, some additional ways to challenge a future, restraining order like this. So we're always looking out for a case like the Wallingfords, and who knows, it might be the same issue again, where she files another restraining order of some type, and they somehow end up with another restraining order, and so we're always looking for ways to challenge these things. And at least in the Wallingford situation, it was definitely a challenge worth fighting.
Well, I would say, I guess for the time being, it seems like there has been positive outcomes in the lawsuit itself. Can't take back the years that you suffered, though. So that ultimately going forward has to be the issue, right? How do we make sure that people who don't deserve to suffer don't have to suffer? I want to thank you guys very much for coming out today. Miranda, thank you very much for sharing your story. And Matt, as always, thank you for the insight. I appreciate your time.
You're welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. And guys, if you like videos like this, want to continue seeing content on firearms, litigation, and the legislative advocacy, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to these videos. Hit that notification bell so that as these videos drop, they go directly to you so that you can view them. Again, our goal here is to inform you on the legislative process, the litigative process, so that the Second Amendment advocacy is as a top priority going to the ballot box this November. We've got to get the right people elected so that these kinds of laws stop plaguing our society. Thanks again, guys, and we'll see you on the next one.